During World War II, Nazi Germany relied on meth to keep its army moving. Sold under the name Pervitin, the drug was given to millions of soldiers to erase fear and hunger and allow days of fighting without any sleep. But this same pill caused addiction, mental collapse, and extreme violence, revealing one of the most dangerous experiments in modern warfare. It started at the end of the 19th century, long before anyone connected drugs to war or mass violence. In 1887, a German chemist successfully created amphetamine for the first time. At the time, it wasn't seen as dangerous or revolutionary. It was just another substance added to a growing list of modern chemical discoveries. A few years later, in 1893, Japanese chemist Nagayoshi Nagai took this work a step further. Using ephedrine, a compound found in certain plants and already used in traditional medicine, he synthesized methamphetamine. This new substance was stronger and longer lasting than amphetamine, but for decades, it remained mostly a scientific curiosity. It stayed inside labs, journals, and small medical discussions. That began to change in the early 20th century as Germany became one of the world's most powerful pharmaceutical producers. German drug companies were already famous for mass-producing modern medicines. Before World War I, German firms were manufacturing aspirin on an industrial scale, and even heroin was sold legally as a medical product. By the 1930s, this industry was highly advanced, well-funded, and deeply connected to both medicine and the state. When chemists revisited methamphetamine during this period, they were no longer thinking in small laboratory terms. They were thinking about mass production. In 1937, a Berlin-based pharmaceutical company called Temmler developed and patented an efficient method to produce methamphetamine in large quantities. This step transformed methamphetamine from a lab substance into a product that could be sold cheaply, quickly, and at scale. Just 1 year later, in 1938, Temmler officially introduced the drug to the public. It was given a friendly, modern name, Pervitin. Almost no one at the time connected this pill to danger. Instead, it was presented as a solution to everyday problems in a fast-moving modern society. Brochures from the time claimed that Pervitin could ease tiredness, suppress hunger, and remove emotional strain. People who took it often felt confident, energetic, and usually positive. Some described feeling sharper and more capable than ever before. In a society obsessed with productivity and strength, this effect was celebrated. At first, almost no one questioned it, but the problems appeared quickly. Doctors began noticing that regular users needed higher doses to feel the same effect. Some patients returned anxious, restless, or emotionally unstable. Others showed signs of dependency. These warnings didn't come from outsiders or enemies. They came from within Germany itself, but were ignored. Hitler's Nazi government, on the surface, condemned alcohol abuse, banned many narcotics, and described drug use as a sign of moral weakness and decay. In Nazi ideology, drugs were supposed to weaken a nation, not strengthen it. But Pervitin did not fit neatly into that category, and so the rules were quietly bent. Instead of being treated like other drugs, Pervitin was promoted as something different. The Nazis framed it as a tool for strength, productivity, and national success. Pervitin was presented as a clean stimulant, not an escape. Nazi propaganda twisted the idea of drug use into something ideological. Hitler himself openly talked about strength and weakness, insisting that Germany had no place for the weak. In this mindset, Pervitin was not seen as a crutch. It was sold as a way for already strong Aryan Germans to become even more efficient and focused. The unspoken message was that this pill was not for people trying to run away from life, but for those pushing themselves harder in the service of the nation. Even before the war began, Pervitin had already spread through civilian society. It wasn't hidden or rare. Police reports and newspaper articles from the late 1930s describe a growing speed pill culture, especially in big cities like Berlin. Nightlife scenes were filled with people staying awake for hours longer than normal. Office workers used it to stay sharp during long days. Factory shift crews took it to get through exhausting schedules. Housewives relied on it to manage cooking, cleaning, childcare, and errands without rest. The drug quietly became part of daily life. Doctors noticed the trend almost immediately. A nutritionist later explained that physicians were seeing even ordinary patients asking directly for Provitin to treat simple tiredness. People were not asking for medical help anymore. They were asking for energy. Demand exploded so fast that Temmler had to massively increase production. By late 1940, the factory was pressing around 833,000 pills every single day. Students used Provitin to pull all-night study sessions. The drug was legal, cheap, and easy to get. Chocolate candies contained it. Pills came in small containers that fit into pockets and purses. But beneath the surface, problems were already starting to show. The Reich Healthführer, Leo Conti, was among those who warned that Provitin was far too risky to be treated like a harmless boost. He and other officials pushed for tighter control. In December 1939, the government finally acted. Provitin was made prescription only. On paper, this was supposed to limit abuse. Soldiers were instructed to receive only small amounts at a time. Civilians were meant to rely on doctors instead of self-dosing. Despite the warnings, Hitler's military leadership was watching Provitin with a very different mindset. To them, the drug didn't represent danger. It represented opportunity. The German army, the Wehrmacht, was preparing for rapid expansion and non-stop movement. Generals were obsessed with speed, surprise, and endurance. A pill that removed fatigue sounded like a gift. The first military experiments with Provitin began quietly in 1938 and 1939. Medical officers tested the drug on troops during the takeover of Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1938. The results were exactly what commanders wanted to see. Soldiers stayed awake longer, marched farther, and complained less. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Provitin was no longer just an experiment. It became part of real combat operations. Tank crews and infantry units were issued dozens of pills so they could move all day and night without rest. One man played a key role in pushing the drug deeper into the military. Dr. Otto Ranke was a physiologist who believed the future of warfare belonged to endurance. In 1938, he tested Provitin on 90 university students to observe its effects. The students stayed awake for days, remained alert, and showed little fear or hesitation. To Ranke, this was proof that the drug could help create soldiers who ignored exhaustion. He believed it could change the outcome of the coming war. Ranke recorded his conclusions carefully. In his diary, he wrote that with Provitin, a person could continue working for 36 to 50 hours without feeling noticeable fatigue. This statement carried enormous weight in military planning for rapid, non-stop attacks. Encouraged by Ranke's findings, the army began distributing Provitin widely as German forces advanced through Poland. The drug quickly earned nicknames among soldiers. Some called the pills Stuka tablets. Others called them Hermann Göring pills, referencing the head of the Luftwaffe, who was himself known for heavy drug use. Provitin was even mixed into food. Pilots chewed on Fliegerschokolade, a chocolate bar laced with meth before night missions. Tank crews received Panzerschokolade, while infantry units were issued Kampfchokolade. These products were designed to keep soldiers moving without sleep, without food, and without hesitation. By October 1939, Poland had fallen. Around 100,000 Polish defenders were dead. Witnesses already began linking the ferocity and pace of the German advance to the widespread use of speed pills. Hitler did not slow down. Instead, he ordered a series of rapid invasions across Europe. Denmark and Norway were attacked first, followed closely by the Low Countries, and then France. These operations were planned to happen fast, one after another, with almost no pause in between. Speed was everything, and German generals were determined not to lose momentum. To make this possible, drug use was quietly encouraged at the highest levels. Commanders understood that normal human limits would slow the army down, so those limits were ignored. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's leading tank warfare experts, made this mindset very clear. He instructed his armored divisions to keep moving forward, even if that meant going without sleep. Rest was treated as a luxury. Stopping was seen as a failure. With Proviton, this brutal pace suddenly seemed possible. The results were shocking. German tank columns rolled almost non-stop through enemy territory. In France, armored units covered roughly 240 miles in just 11 days. That kind of movement was unheard of at the time. Infantry units followed behind, marching forward day and night. One wartime report described soldiers pushing ahead almost mechanically, afraid to stop because stopping meant falling behind. The speed of these attacks stunned Germany's enemies. Allied leaders struggled to understand what they were seeing. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill later wrote that he was dumbfounded by the German assault. He described it as an irresistible incursion of armored vehicles, moving so quickly that it felt unreal. He had never seen an army advance like that. Part of what shocked him most was the fact that German panzer crews seemed to barely stop at all. These were men operating tanks for days on end, often running on little or no sleep. Churchill and other Allied observers openly admitted that the pace was overwhelming. Even Axis magazine celebrated it, boasting that German troops were powered by a modern wonder drug. Inside Germany, this was framed as proof of superiority. Outside Germany, it felt like facing an enemy that didn't get tired. The fear this created was real and immediate. For many soldiers, the first effects of the drug felt almost magical. They experienced short bursts of euphoria. Hunger faded into the background. Pain felt distant. Fear was easier to ignore. Orders were followed without hesitation. Photographs from the campaign show the physical reality behind the propaganda. A German museum exhibit displays images of thin, exhausted soldiers with hard, empty expressions. This was not discipline alone. It was chemistry. Proviton acted like fuel poured directly into the human body. Behind the front lines, production reached staggering levels. At Temmler's factory, output exploded to meet military demand. Between April and July of 1940 alone, German soldiers were issued 35 million tablets. By this point, the entire Wehrmacht was involved. Infantry units used it, the Luftwaffe used it, the Navy used it. Speed was no longer an exception. It was standard operating procedure. But the same things that made Proviton look like a miracle at first were the exact reasons it began to destroy the people using it. After the early victories and fast advances, soldiers were no longer just tired. Many of them were breaking down completely. The physical side effects were severe and immediate. Soldiers who relied heavily on Proviton began to suffer serious heart problems. During the 1940 campaign in France, there were multiple reports of officers collapsing in the field. One lieutenant colonel who had been taking 4 pills a day complained of intense heart pain. His condition worsened quickly. In another case, a tank division commander took just 1 pill early in the morning and suffered a heart attack before noon. Other soldiers collapsed while off duty. Some never woke up after the drug wore off. A number of deaths were officially listed as heart failure following extended Proviton use. The mental damage was even more widespread and harder to control. Proviton allowed soldiers to stay awake for extreme lengths of time. But once they passed the 36-hour mark, the crash became unavoidable. A historian later described this phase bluntly. After the high faded, soldiers often felt less like warriors and more like zombies. Their bodies were exhausted, their thoughts were confused, and their grip on reality weakened. Many became delirious. Others experienced paranoia, believing they were being watched or threatened by people around them. This was where Nazi propaganda collapsed under its own weight. The image of the unstoppable, disciplined super soldier didn't match what officers were seeing on the ground. Young men who had marched confidently across Europe were now shaking, hallucinating, and unable to follow basic orders. Units became unstable, Commanders struggled to control troops who no longer trusted their surroundings or each other. In some cases, the damage turned violent. The same academic study that described these soldiers as zombies also recorded a darker outcome. Some men became aggressive and unpredictable. There were incidents where soldiers attacked civilians without orders. Others turned on their own officers. Soldiers suffering from paranoia were known to unalive themselves or shoot their comrades. Others simply died from heart failure after prolonged use. Entire units were affected. In one regiment, an entire patrol nearly mutinied after being pushed through endless marches fueled by Provitin. In other cases, isolated guards, left awake for days or weeks, began to kill themselves. Discipline broke down in terrifying ways. Even Feldwebels, ordinary sergeants who enforced rules and routines, were sometimes shot by the very men they had disciplined once the drug wore off and reality came crashing back. By 1944, the situation for Nazi Germany had turned grim. The fast victories were gone. The Blitzkrieg was over. German cities were being bombed, supply lines were collapsing, and entire armies were being crushed on multiple fronts. Losses were massive, morale was low, and the idea of a quick or clean victory was no longer realistic. Facing this reality, Nazi leaders and military planners became desperate. They were no longer looking for smart solutions. They were looking for anything that might delay defeat, even briefly. In this desperate atmosphere, German scientists returned to the same idea they'd leaned on before: drugs. But this time, they went further than ever. The result was a horrifying experience known as D9, a so-called super soldier pill. This was not just a stronger version of Provitin. It was a dangerous mix designed to push the human body beyond any reasonable limit. The pill combined Provitin with cocaine to increase stimulation and opiates to dull pain. The goal was simple and brutal: create soldiers who could march longer, feel no pain, and ignore exhaustion completely. D9 was never meant to improve life. It was meant to squeeze the last possible movement out of dying bodies. The drug was tested on concentration camp prisoners, not volunteers. These prisoners were forced to take 3 doses of the pill per day. Under its effects, they were made to march and run extreme distances, sometimes up to 90 miles in a single day. This was not training. It was torture disguised as research. At first, the effects seemed to confirm what Nazi planners wanted to believe. The prisoners showed bursts of manic energy. They could move far beyond normal physical limits. Pain felt distant. Fatigue disappeared temporarily. But this phase didn't last long. The crash that followed was devastating. Once the drug wore off, the body collapsed. The hangover was brutal, marked by extreme exhaustion, mental confusion, and physical breakdown. Many prisoners suffered severe damage or died as a result of these tests. The D9 project revealed just how far the Nazi regime had fallen. By this stage of the war, they were openly mixing hard drugs and human experimentation in an attempt to manufacture endurance. It was no longer about winning battles. It was about forcing movement from bodies that had nothing left to give. Weaponized exhaustion had become policy. While these experiments were happening, regular German troops were still being issued Provitin across all fronts. But by now, the drug no longer gave the same advantage. On the Eastern Front in 1944, soldiers were fighting in brutal conditions. They dragged themselves through mud, snow, and destroyed villages. Even with pills, they were starving, freezing, and overwhelmed. Entire units were shattered by casualties, disease, and constant retreat. No amount of stimulation could replace missing fuel, destroyed tanks, or broken supply lines. The reality was unavoidable. Provitin could keep a man awake, but it couldn't stop an army from collapsing. By early 1945, the illusion was completely gone. Even Joseph Goebbels admitted privately that the drug no longer worked the way it once had. The soldiers were exhausted in a way no pill could fix. With Germany's surrender in May 1945, the horrors of the Nazi drug experiment had become painfully obvious. Millions of doses of Provitin had been swallowed, and whole units of men were left with shattered minds and bodies. The speed that helped seize Europe had given way to a brutal crash. Accounts from conquered territories later testified at Nuremberg that some German soldiers acted like demons. Some who never harmed others suddenly became vicious. After the war, stories came out. Concentration camp survivors who had been forced to work running on speed pills, old German veterans who still craved the drug in ruins, wrecked by what they'd done. The Allies soon banned Provitin and similar drugs, but the legacy lived on. The Germans themselves called their meth Hermann Göring pills, or Blitz tablets. It was no joke. The Nazi regime had powered its blitzkrieg with methamphetamine, only to unleash terrifying consequences. In the end, Provitin became a dark footnote in history's most tragic chapter. What started as a civilian stimulant ended in shocked revelations of addiction, breakdowns, suicide, and massacre. The victims were both German soldiers and innocent people caught in their path. The blood money of one more mile cost thousands of lives.